The main places where pedestrians have priority is at intersections and pedestrian crossings. But they don't always have priority. It depends on a few factors. Let's start with crossings. Here where I drive, pedestrian crossings come in two colors, white and yellow. White ones are at intersections that are protected by either a stop sign or a traffic light. Yellow crossings are not protected by any of those two. They can be either at intersections or anywhere in between two intersections. At yellow crossings, pedestrians have priority at all times, unless there's an exception, of course, like an emergency vehicle or something like that. Sometimes there are crossings of both colors at the same intersection, like here. In this case, the one on the axis that is protected by a stop is white, and the one that isn't protected by one is yellow. In both these cases, you have to stop if there's a pedestrian crossing or about to cross. The only difference is that in this direction, pedestrian or not, you have to stop anyway because of the stop sign, and in this direction, you have to stop only if there's a pedestrian. Here they're both on the same axis, but this one is in the lane of the yield, so it's not protected by the traffic light behind. This one is. So at this one, you'll need to stop if there's a pedestrian, regardless of the color of the traffic light behind. At this one, the light determines the priority. Something that causes some confusion with students is, do I have to stop at a yellow crossing even if there's no pedestrian? No, you don't. Some people recommend slowing down, but that's not always a good idea, because if there's a driver behind, they won't expect you to slow down without a valid reason. So if you have a clear view of the surroundings of the crossing, you don't necessarily need to slow down. However, if it's hidden by something, like a truck in this case, then you can slow down a bit and be prepared to stop in case a pedestrian pops out from behind the obstacle. When approaching a crossing, look far and wide, as you should always do anyway, in order to see if there are any pedestrians about to get on the crossing. If you're on a two-way street and there's a pedestrian wanting to cross on the other side of the street, you still have to stop and give them priority. Now, some people confuse these symbols on the asphalt with a pedestrian crossing. They aren't. They're just indicating that you're in a school zone. A pedestrian crossing is a set of parallel lines like these. But you will often see crossings near schools, either white like here, protected, or yellow like here, unprotected. And just because there's a symbol of a pedestrian on a panel or on the asphalt doesn't mean that it's automatically a pedestrian crossing. For example, this one indicates a reserved lane for pedestrians. It's the equivalent of a bicycle path, but for pedestrians. You see these in some places where there's no sidewalk. A pedestrian crossing has the symbols of one or two pedestrians and a dashed line under the symbols. If you see one like this, it means that you're near a school, but it's not just for students, it's for everybody. These panels are especially important in situations where you can't see the lines on the asphalt, either because they faded away or when they're hidden, like when it's snowing, for example. Actually, winter is a big reason why markings on the asphalt fade away. By law, pedestrians can't just cross the street anywhere, even if they do it all the time. They have to cross at intersections or at pedestrian crossings if there are any of those two nearby. If there aren't, they can cross, but they have to yield to traffic. I went into more detail on priorities at stops in my previous video. The link will be in the description. But basically, whenever we have a stop, pedestrian crossing or not, if a pedestrian is crossing or about to cross, they have priority. And there could be a lot of them, especially in busy streets like commercial streets, so you'll need to wait as long as it takes. And don't forget the pedestrians on the other side of the street too. This is a mistake students often make. They focus too much on their side, then whenever their side is free, they go. This could fail you at the exam depending on the situation. So after your side is free, do a visual sweep of the other side before going. At an intersection where there's no stop for us, then the pedestrian doesn't have priority. Like here, there's a stop on this axis, but not on the axis I'm in. So the pedestrian doesn't have priority in this case. She would, only if she had a crossing, and in this case, the crossing would be yellow. In this case, however, I'm turning, and there's a stop on the axis that I'm turning into. Here's the same intersection seen from another angle. I'm turning here, and there's a stop sign on this axis. So in this case, I have to give priority to the pedestrians. So if you're turning, whether there's a stop for you or not, pedestrians have priority. At intersections with traffic lights, whether there's a pedestrian crossing or not, the light determines the priority, just like for any other road user. If the pedestrian has a green light, they can go, and if they have a red, they have to wait. If you want to turn at a green light and there are pedestrians crossing or about to cross, they have priority. Sometimes, usually at busier intersections, there will be a green arrow pointing up like this, which indicates that you can only go straight. Usually this light comes right after the red light, and its main purpose is to give some time to the first wave of pedestrians to cross after they've waited at the red light. Then, even if the light switches to a normal green light, pedestrians still have priority. Now, something else that causes a lot of confusion with students is this white pedestrian light. A lot of times, they think that as long as this light is still on, they cannot turn. If this light is still on, but you have a green light that allows you to turn, and there are no pedestrians, you can turn. In fact, as a driver, you could ignore this light completely. This light is mainly of interest to pedestrians. As a driver, it doesn't change anything. You can check it, for example, to have an idea of when the light turns yellow. Usually it does when the countdown reaches 0, but basically you should mainly rely on the normal lights. And there are a lot of intersections where there isn't a pedestrian light like that. That doesn't change anything. Pedestrians still have priority if the light is green for them. If there's an arrow pointing up like this one, however, then you cannot turn whether there are pedestrians or not. In this case, I have to wait until there's either a normal green light or an arrow to the right. There are some situations where pedestrians don't have priority at green lights though, and that's when you have priority to turn. And this happens mostly when turning left, and you have either a flashing green light or a green arrow pointing to the left that give you priority to turn left. So in that case, if there are pedestrians, they still have a red light on their side, so you can go. In the next video, safe distances from pedestrians. So stay tuned and see you soon.